Well, then already. Hello, everybody. Welcome on out. It's really good to see you all here at our very first event back at the Ferry Building. I don't know if any of you knew that, but that's very true. It's the very first event in person in the Ferry Building. And so we're very, very happy to have you here. Next up, welcome back to Book Passage. I don't know if any of you have been to the store before, but if you haven't, then we host events just like these, or we used to, almost 5 days a week during some of the months. We have everybody spanning from scientists that come in to talk about interesting stuff to business people that talk about how to make money. Every once in a while, we have my favorite genre, science fiction fantasy, and I jump for joy for weeks and talk about it for weeks after. But nonetheless, we here at the bookstore have always loved our unique position in bringing to you wonderful books, wonderful authors, and giving to you wonderful conversations, just like the one we will hopefully have here tonight. But regardless of what it is that we do, however large and however small, we cannot forget all that you do. And supporting books, supporting authors, and supporting bookstores, particularly the independent ones just like us. So thanks for coming out tonight, and thank you for making us the liveliest bookstore in the world. Now allow me to, oh, thank you. Yes, applause. Everybody else applause. Talking over the clap lines. How bad of a politician I am. Now allow me to introduce the author of The Illusion of Knowledge, the paradigm shift in aging research that shows the way to human rejuvenation. Dr. Harold Katcher is one of the discoverers of the human breast cancer gene, which has a thing after it. And has thousands of citations in scientific literature, with publications which range from protein structure to bacteriology, biotechnology, biochemistry, a couple more. He was the academic director for the natural sciences in the Asian division for the University of Maryland Global Campus, and is nowadays the chief scientific officer for Yuvan Research, I got it right, Incorporated, which is working on the development of rejuvenation treatments, I presume like the ones we are speaking on today. Thank you one last time for coming out tonight, everybody. I'm really, really excited to see you here today. But just so you know, there will be questions and answers at the end, so if you haven't thought of a question yet, do your best to think of one, or think of one while we're talking. But allow me to introduce, again, the author of The Illusion of Knowledge, Dr. Harold Katcher. Welcome.
Thank you very much. My great pleasure to see everyone. This is the first book I ever wrote, so I can't, and it's the first book launch I've ever been to, so I'm not quite so sure of what to do. But let me just give you a little bit of the history or background and why the book was written and what it's about and what it's based on. And it has a real basis, even though this is perhaps a book launch, and I should be real proud of it, and I am. It's not so easy to write a book. What's really important is what the book was based on. And let me just cut it short and tell you that we have managed to reverse aging in rats. We believe we can reverse aging in rats and humans, and dogs, and just about any mammal you can think of. And that's the basis of the book. But the book is more than that. It's kind of a history and philosophy, but altogether, from beginning to end, it's a kind of a narrative that I hope holds your attention throughout. And I write it in a manner such that your educated person can read it. You don't have to be technically competent in molecular biology to read it. But what it does is presents a new theory of aging. And the new theory of aging is based partially on research I've done, and partially on the experimental results we've achieved in our lab at Mumbai. So what I'm going to do, just to give you a little taste of what I've written, I'm going to read a couple of passages, if it's all right. Pardon my mask for slipping down, but it's hopefully it's totally. Hopefully we won't be busted. Okay, so I have here in this very small notebook, a very small sentence that says stuff to read at opening. And the first one says the tale of Gilgamesh. Now, I was looking through Lifespan.io's website, and I noticed somebody had written an essay on Gilgamesh. I was totally surprised. I didn't read the essay, but since I already spoke about Gilgamesh in my book, and since it seems to have popular attention, let me just tell you a little bit, because this is at the beginning of history. One of the earliest cradles of civilization was called Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers. And one of the earliest civilizations in Mesopotamia was Sumer. And Sumer was a country, but of course in those days there were no countries per se. There were city-states that constantly warred with each other. The richest and most prominent of those city-states was Uruk. And Gilgamesh was the king of Uruk. So let me read a little bit now. Let me also give you a little background on what people believed about life and death back in ancient Mesopotamia. They did not believe in death. They thought that death was merely a transition to another phase of life. Unfortunately, not a kind of phase of life that you'd be interested in, because you lived underground and drank muddy water and ate dust for the rest of eternity. So, not my idea of a preferable immortality. So let me read. Where am I? Page 15. Okay. Gilgamesh, from the Epic of Gilgamesh, was king of wealthy Uruk, a Sumerian city-state that would be in Iraq today, and a fierce and powerful ruler who angered his people by using his droit de seigneur. You know what that is? It's the right of the first night. The medieval nobility had the right to possess a bride on her wedding night. It wasn't often used, and a lot of nobles who did use it wound up dead. But in this case, pardon me, I'm reading. I don't want to go too far. He angered his people by using his droit de seigneur to possess every new bride on her wedding night. And the people of Uruk, let me read. In response to entreaties from the citizens of Uruk, the gods fashioned a friend for Gilgamesh, a man his equal in strength, the wild man Enkidu. Enkidu was lured from the wild with beer and women. It tells you something about the start of civilization right there. But specifically the temple prostitute Shamhat, and brought into Uruk. He's essentially lured into Uruk. Eventually, after Enkidu hears of what Gilgamesh does to young brides, Enkidu too appears at a wedding and fights Gilgamesh for the honor of the new bride. And though he loses to Gilgamesh, the two become inseparable friends, and fierce Gilgamesh changes his demeanor to become a hero to his city. In their epic adventures together, Enkidu kills the demigod Humbaba and the great bull of heaven, and is killed by the gods in return. In retribution, Gilgamesh is now alone and sees what death has reduced his friend to, and greatly fears it. In the original story, I've given a sort of synopsis of the original story. After 4 days of standing vigil over his dead friend, he sees a maggot drop out of his nose, and that puts the fear of death into him. Where am I? Gilgamesh is now alone to see what death has reduced his friend to, and greatly fears it. Thus he begins his journey to the island far away to find the only immortal man who lived with his equally immortal wife. His name was Utnapishtim. It's not a name I normally say, so I don't speak Sumerian, but hopefully that's close enough. He's the modern equivalent. Let me just read it. He is also the model for the man known as Noah in the Hebrew Bible, one of the few to survive the Great Flood. The journey, as can be imagined, this island of far away, was full of wonders. He takes the road the sun god takes, under the mountains, and past the jewel-bearing trees in the kingdom of the gods. But when Gilgamesh finally meets Utnapishtim, the immortal convinces Gilgamesh that his quest is for naught, that the gods themselves have planted the seed of death in every creation, but offers Gilgamesh a challenge that will give him immortality if he can pass it. He has to stay awake for 6 days. He cannot. And then there's some clever tricks that convince him that he actually fell asleep during that time. So Gilgamesh is disconsolate, and Utnapishtim's wife, immortal wife, out of pity, makes Utnapishtim tell Gilgamesh, a lot of vowels in these ancient names, about a plant found at the bottom of the ocean that will make him young again. So Gilgamesh travels there by tying heavy rocks to his feet, finds the youth plant, and brings it to the surface. Suspicious, and here may be the point of the story, or one point anyway, Gilgamesh decides to travel back to Uruk and try to youth plant out on an old man before using it on himself. He wasn't totally convinced. The advantage, I say, of being the king. But on the journey home, Gilgamesh and his boat captain stop to catch some sleep on an island. The snake eats the youth plant and from then on rejuvenates itself by shedding its skin each year. A just so story. And Gilgamesh becomes desperate. For what had he wasted his life? In searching for more life, he wasted the little life that he'd been given. And yet, after several days of sailing, and the great walls of Uruk loom up before them, Gilgamesh pridefully shows the boat captain his city and his accomplishments, thus leaving Gilgamesh the great king, 2/3 human, 1/3 god. I won't explain the genetics of that. And he is now in the same position 4,000 years ago that we find ourselves now. Oh, let me remove this hat. I just want to thank Walter Crompton for giving me this hat. And I actually wore it just to thank Walter. And also to dispel the rumor that I have been taking E5 and have black hair underneath my hat, which I've read. Okay, so the ancients, no less than us, were concerned with life and death, and that is a great wisdom in which there is great sorrow. And it appears, in regard to those topics, that nothing much has changed in the past 4,000 years. So, are we still wasting our time searching for more life rather than enjoying what we've been given? Why not accept our destiny and enjoy the life we have? Buddha had answered that question. Life is suffering, but rather than enjoying what we've been given, why not accept our destiny? And yes, I said that. If I had been asked the same question a dozen years ago, I would have said yes, the Epic of Gilgamesh is a cautionary tale, a sort of don't throw away what you're given in an unjustifiable expectation of getting more. But now my opinion has changed. And you'll see why later on in the book. And I believe that we can have biological immortal usefulness with the recognition that nothing, not even the universe itself, is really immortal. Okay, so that was the first passage, and we see that it pretty much sets the human condition as it is right now. Here, we've been given, of all the animal kingdom, we are the only people who've been given the intelligence to realize that we're going to age and die. And it's put its impression on every work of mankind. There's nothing you can do that isn't shadowed by death. We think we can change that. I know, that's remarkable and unbelievable. Let me read a bit more, assuming I can find my reading list. Hey, Walter, I want it back. Okay, this part, pardon me, this part of my reading list says controversial stuff, page 32. So let's see what I found controversial. Okay, I first talk about the Roman Empire and Christianity coming into Rome and how it was, I mean, everybody knows the story of the lions and the Christians, and they were not very well received. Nero actually set them on fire to light his parties. Yes. By 313 ACE, that's what we would call AD, but scientifically it's after Common Era. By 313 ACE, Emperor Constantine legitimized Christianity after having a vision of the cross before winning a battle against a rival. In hoc signo vinces, in this sign we conquer, the sign of the cross. But Constantine is said to have converted to Christianity on his deathbed, but during his life he was the Pontifex Maximus, the chief priest of the Roman pagan religion. Okay, where am I? And 7 decades later, Theodosius I made Christianity the official religion of the Roman Empire. But rather than the religion controlling the state took over the religion, so that the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost were by pronouncement co-equals. Okay? The decision was made by a triumvirate of emperors who are also supposed to be co-equals. So they wanted you to know that God, the Holy Ghost, and Jesus are co-equals too. And the rulers, by the way, were Theodosius I, Gratian, and Valentian II. And they said that those foolish madmen, the triumvirate stated, that did not believe in the co-equality were to be punished by the emperor as he desired. In 385 ACE, the execution of Priscillian, a priest who they considered a heretic, he believed in a sort of an ascetic cult, he was killed. So here we have perhaps the first instance of the church practicing capital punishment on people for heresy. At this point, I say Christianity was transformed from a religion based on the revelations of Jesus and the devotion of his disciples to an official organ of the state. Okay, well, actually, I wanted to say more about that. I think I've skipped a page, but let's. What I wanted to say, actually, I'm not reading this. I'm just telling you. You can read it yourself. I probably write better than I speak. So, what's I going to say?
What did you want to say in that chapter? What did you want to say?
Yeah, what I wanted to say. Well, let me give you a little background. Christianity came from Judaism. And in Judaism, the concept of an immortal soul was not there. And in fact, in Jesus' teachings, he doesn't talk about immortal souls in heaven. He talks about resurrection. I am the resurrection and the life, for example. So, my daughter Rachel just came in. Now, where does the idea of the immortal soul come from? Because the Catholic Church could not accept the idea of resurrection. What's resurrected? Suppose your body's burned. Suppose it's eaten by worms. What's resurrected? So they used the best scientific knowledge of the time to figure out that, no, that can't be the way it works. You must have an immortal soul that lives after you. Now, why the church should accept the words of Plato and later Aristotle over the words of Jesus is kind of beyond me. And in fact, Martin Luther noted the difference too. And he did not believe in an immortal soul. So Christianity doesn't need an immortal soul. And I think an immortal soul is just a way to control people so that even after they're dead, you still have control. And unfortunately, I think the immortal soul has probably led to more deaths than any other concept on the face of the earth. You just think about those people strapping the suicide vests on themselves to blow themselves up. Okay. Now, so as I told you in the beginning, we at UVan Research have been able to reverse the age of rats. We've shown so by 30 different measures, and 31 including the golden standard of aging, which is the DNA methylation clock of Stephen Horvath. And we have that too. And his clock says we've reduced the ages of old rats to young adults, essentially by 54%. Now, that's amazing. And I have to tell you now that further work, we have a project with a fellow in Belgium named Didier Colonel, and he's interested in longevity. Our interest really is, at least at the moment, on curing the diseases of aging. But his interest is on longevity, so we've been keeping on retreating our rats, and now there's third retreatment. But even prior to that, we have videos of, I wish you had the, we'll show them, somehow we'll get them to you, showing, previously, to me, all the physiological tests showed our rats were young. And Steve Horvath's tests showed that the rats were young. But when you looked at the rats, they didn't look young. Now they look young.
After the third treatment.
Just before the third treatment. So we waited another 90 days after the first treatment. After the second treatment, rather. The first time we did the experiment, we only waited 30 days, sacrificed the rats, and checked all their parameters. Sorry to do that. this time we are going to let the rats continue to live as long as they possibly can. If they live 50 years, that'll be nice. I don't know if Didier is willing to pay for 50 years of rat, but this is what I wanted to say, and this is the introduction to what I'm about to read. And it was very much based on a dream, the research. The research wasn't based on a dream per se. The dream was a motivator. So let me just read you the dream. It's almost embarrassing to read. Actually, it is embarrassing to read. But I'll read it anyway because it's true. Truth is real important to me. 152. So first I start off with a little bit about what people in those days believed about aging. In those days, it was pretty clear that DNA damage was the real cause of aging. So my interest in DNA repair was clear to me. And I did some interesting work finally publishing in biochemistry. A bit before getting my doctorate, I went to University of Southern California to work with the fathers of bioinformatics, Michael Waterman and Temple Smith. And there I learned to use computers and to find out interesting facts about DNA. A very disturbing event occurred, however, during that time that changed my life. I had a rotten tooth. I have one now, as a matter of fact, but this was a previous rotten tooth. A back molar that was becoming very painful. The dentist, who was also the manager of my building, kept on putting off my appointment. So I tried whatever came to mind to quell the infection, peroxide and mouthwash and everything else, which by the time I'm speaking of, my face had swollen enormously, and my neck was about the size of a football sticking out on the side. I went to the dentist. He said, "I can't help you. You're way too far gone. You've got to see a doctor." I was getting increasingly sick, and I called Kaiser Permanente Hospital and told them of my condition. And then, feeling really, really ill, I took a city bus to the hospital down Vermont Avenue. Upon arrival, I went to the front desk, and he asked where to go. I was told I had no idea. And I should just wait in the ER like everybody else. Yeah, waiting for treatment. At this time, I was getting sicker and sicker. My neck had bulged like a football, and there were dozens, if not hundreds, in the ER ahead of me. It was a big city hospital, Kaiser Permanente, LA. I was about to pass out when I heard my name being called. Harold Katcher, is Harold Katcher here? And it turns out there was a Dr. Golon, whose name I can't forget because he saved my life, who actually went out of his way, a big city doctor went out of his way to find a patient in this huge hospital. And when he saw me, he started injecting me like, I'm not reading now, but I'll tell you the story. It's the same as the story I wrote. He started injecting me with painkillers, but even before they took effect, he started cutting into my neck. I said to him, "Doc, I'm going to pass out." He said, "No, you're not." And the next thing I knew, I woke up with a tube in my trachea and red lights blinking, and I was in the critical care unit. Okay, so now I'll read. It said, in critical care with a tube going into my trachea and surrounded by lots of machinery with beeps and blinking red lights and an IV dripping powerful antibiotics into my veins. I was very sick, and I did not know if I would live until the next day. And that night, I had a dream which would change my life. Nowadays, I rarely remember dreams. In fact, just about never. But this was different. I was in an alcove high above a dusky road, lit by a dim red sun. It was noon, and marching down that road were soldiers, and a person of some importance was addressing those troops. And I knew then that they were marching in honor of me. This is a dream, remember. I knew I was not on Earth. And in fact, somehow I knew it was 400 years from now. Don't ask me how, I don't know. But on a planet orbiting a dwarf red star, I knew, perhaps by what the speaker said, that it was 400 years in the future. I can't remember every word of his speech this official gave, but the line that resonated with me and changed my life was, and he said this to the troops, to honor Harold Katcher, who brought immortality to mankind. And that's what I find so embarrassing, that it's hard to read it. It sometimes brings tears to my eyes, but it didn't, so I'm good. It was a literal fever dream. Yet at that point, I knew that I wasn't going to die. However, it was crazy that I would bring immortality to mankind. I was already at the point of giving up with the concept that aging could be any more than ameliorated, delayed perhaps. And I even proposed schemes for conducting bacterial DNA repair enzyme containing plasmids to fix human cells. But we have maybe 50 trillion cells, 50 million cells. How do you get any repair? How do you possibly repair 50 million cells? How do you get it in there? To me, the concept was like trying to sweep away the surf with a broom. You know, it's a useless endeavor. Netherlands. Well, I don't have to read the rest of this because that shaped my life. Even though it seemed that my very first move was to move as far away from any possibility of realizing my dreams as I possibly could. I became a computer programmer, self-taught, but I'm good. I could work, and I actually got paid a lot more than as a scientist. I love computer programming. It's a lot of fun. I still do it as a hobby. But I said, this is impossible. I have no lab facilities. How could I ever, quote, bring immortality to mankind? It's crazy. It just makes no sense at all. And then I felt guilty, the guilty pleasure out of being a programmer. There was nothing significant out of it. I would make payroll programs and all kinds of stuff that every business needs and uses constantly. I think I did a very nice job. And I noticed years after when I visited the place, they were still using my programs. Yeah. Family Films of Utah, remember, dear? So what was I going to say? So then I felt guilty, so I said, well, let's get back into education. I got a job at the University of Maryland, and eventually I became the head of the academic director of their science program in their Asian division. So I lived in Tokyo. I spent my first years living in Korea, very interesting place, and then spent 8 years in Tokyo, 8 years. And I was no closer to achieving my dream because I had no lab facilities. I had no research assistants. I had no graduate students. My wife said, I don't want to die in Korea. Remember? So we decided we decided to go back home. Where did we first? We went back to Salt Lake City, where we originally lived in New York. I'm a New Yorker. I lived there for 40 years. But when crime conditions became so bad, and I was almost mugged on the streets, we decided to leave. And Salt Lake City was a nice, comfortable place, but and I taught online courses at that point. So I actually made a comfortable living without leaving my basement. Now with COVID, a lot of people know that feeling. And one day I was sitting down looking at some papers that might be of interest to me, and I found a reference to a paper from 2005 written by Irina and Mike Convoy, Tom Rando, a bunch of people who are now luminaries in the biotechnology field. And the name of the on page 158 now. The name of the paper was Rejuvenation of Age Progenitor Cells by Exposure to a Young Systemic Environment. What they were saying is that now, I'll give you a little background on this. There's the most horrendous experimental technique that I've ever heard of. It's called Parabiosis. And what you do is you sew two animals together so that they share a common circulatory system. In this case, it was heterochronic parabiosis. Heterochronic means different ages. So two animals of different ages were sewn together. And this first occurred during the 40s by Clive McKay, who was a guy who discovered calorie restriction increases lifespan, for example. So he was not nobody. And he did this experiment, and he concluded, based on very flimsy evidence, that which we've recently seen repeated in a different way, and very flimsy evidence that when you cut into the animal, the old treated animal, the tissues were still soft. And every surgeon knows, or every housewife knows, if you're cutting up an old bird, it's really much harder. And that goes for an old bird if the bird is... And the tendons tend to grow yellow with age, but in this case, the tendons remained white in the older parabiont. The younger parabiont, on the other hand, seemed to become older. Now, this experiment was repeated in the 80s. I'm trying to remember his name. His name was so German that it becomes... Ludwig. Yeah, by Ludwig and Eschler. They tried the same experiment, and they showed, especially with paired females, which is interesting, that they actually increased the maximum lifespan of the rats. Now, increasing the mean lifespan of the rats just means the rats are basically healthier. But increasing the maximum lifespan of the rats is something entirely different. So, where am I? There's one sentence I wanted to read here. This is it. Further work by the original Stanford group. By the way, here we are, and these people are still at Stanford, some of them at least. Tom Rando is now the head of neurology and the head of their Aging Science Institute. They were the people who really continued this work at heterochronic parabiosis. But it didn't stop there. Amy Wagers one of the original Stanford group, went to Harvard, and she recruited a Saul Valeda. And Saul Valeda showed, and this amazed everybody, that you actually improved the cognitive abilities of the old rats with parabiosis. The rats became smarter. They could do what young rats could do. This is really pretty amazing. We've demonstrated all of this in our lab, much greater than he ever did. So Steve Valeda, I'm quoting him now, says, in aged animals, exposure to young blood through heterochronic parabiosis improves stem cell function in muscle, liver, spinal cord, and in the brain, and ameliorates cardiac hypertrophy. Other experiments by other investigators have added to that list of tissues that are regenerated by young blood. And my response, after reading, it's the name of the chapter, after reading the 205 Convoy paper, I suddenly realized that everything that I had been taught and taught myself as a professor about aging was wrong. Was false. It quickly became clear to me that cellular aging was a myth. Now, let me put this down again for another second, because this is what people believe. People believe you're composed of trillions of cells. Those cells have a lifespan. They're damaged. When they're damaged, they don't multiply. They can't perform their functions. So first, your cells age and die, and then the tissues that they're composed of are malfunctioning, and then the organs, the tissues composed malfunction, and the organ system, the organism, and that's it. That's us. We die. We're old, we die. It's not the case, because that's what the Convoy experiment showed. And it wasn't even realized at the time. There's so many things that aren't realized. Almost every bit of technique I used to develop E5 was in the literature and unnoted. So it was really a question of connecting dots. Okay, at this stage, I think, what was I going to say? I continue somewhere with that, Akshay?
No, so you were talking about how when you read the Convoy paper,
Yeah.
you suddenly revisited the idea of aging
And that was the basis. That was the basis of my new theory of aging, because it clearly showed that aging was not a cellular, what they call a cell non-autonomous phenomenon. That means cells did not age. It's their environment that aged them, not their history. It's our history that ages us, not our environment can age us too, for sure. It's always a combination. But the fact is, if you take an old cell and put it in a young body, it's rejuvenated. If you take a young cell and put it in an old body, it becomes dysfunctional. It's exactly the opposite of what you'd expect if damage was in fact the cause of aging. Yeah. Then you'd expect that the young, vigorous, undamaged cell would make perfect grafts, but in fact, it's the opposite. Yes, sir. Can't it be both?
Yeah.
Meaning what? Oh, it's absolutely both. Absolutely both. But let me tell you this, and just put my quote theory in a nutshell, in a small nutshell. I'll preface it by one statement noted by several naturalists, that of all the terrestrial vertebrate classes, mammals, birds, reptiles, amphibians, their maximum age is in most cases an integral multiple of the time from conception to sexual maturity.
Yeah.
And later on, I explain how Medawar's hypothesis about aging has to be wrong, and everything is based on it. And later on, I say a lot of controversial things. For instance, how modern aging theory is based on Darwin, and actually based on natural selection, even though Darwin himself said that natural selection is not the only mode by which. So really, they've reduced evolution to a cartoon, I remember reading years ago about a paper that showed that aging animals can actually have a higher population density. And it was by somebody at MIT, and it was a computer simulation. What was different about this computer simulation? Because nobody else had ever found that. It had 2 dimensions. Something so important as your lifespan can't be based on such nonsense, on basically a cartoon. Yeah, sure, you're using, and I'm a programmer, I could easily write a program that, as a matter of fact, there are things called genetic algorithms that do exactly that. What was he saying?
Yeah, so all your research and your theory, how you developed your theory and then started researching on that?
Yeah, so it became very clear to me that aging was programmed. That you're not given a life. You're not given life. You're given a life. You're not born with a bunch of proteins and enzymes floating around, and your life has a definite trajectory, and the trajectory is the same for all mammals. People talk about the shape and the pace of life, and really the only difference between mammals is the pace at which those stages pass. Another thing is that developmental biology ends at young adulthood. You know, you can tell a toddler from a preteen, from a teen, etc., but you can tell a 40-year-old from a 60-year-old, from an 80-year-old as well.
Yeah.
So why not just assume these are aging phenotypes? And that's my basic theory. And the role of environment in this is to create damage, because damage is the propelling force in later life that eventually brings you to the state that nature wants you, which is dead. That's because your children, have you any children, are more selected than you are. So it's natural. Well, let me just say to conclude, humankind has gone against nature in a very successful way. We didn't require 1 million years to grow wings in order to fly. We didn't have to wait 100 million years to grow gills and fins in order to plumb the depths of the oceans. Right now, for the first time, I believe, because I think this is more than a book launch. I think this will be a revolution. A revolution in biological science, and eventually when we come up with our mass production techniques, it'll be a revolution in human history. Nothing like this has ever occurred before. Nothing like this was even ever expected. So that's about it. I'll take any questions that you have.
Hi everybody, my name is Nicholas. I'm representing the publisher NTZ, and I will bring the microphone for you for questions. But first, I will make a question to Harold. Harold, there are many people with age-related diseases like atherosclerosis or diabetes, and every day around 100,000 people die from age-related disease. So there are many people that who are hoping that your research bring rejuvenation for them because they are suffering right now. And on the other hand, there are many children because in your book you wrote that when you were a kid, you were already worried about aging and the fact that your parents, grandparents, yourself would gonna die someday.
My mother died when I was 17, so.
Yeah, and nowadays I'm sure there are many kids that who are in the same position. They're worried about the future, about the parents, the grandparents. So what could you say to these two groups, the people who are old and with age-related diseases, and the kids that are worried about the future?
No,
Harold.
pardon me. The Federal Drug Administration does not consider aging a disease. Therefore, all of our efforts are directed towards the cure of the diseases of aging. We think that the same cure will exist for all of the different diseases of aging, and it'll have the unfortunate side effect of making you young. One of the interesting things about this is that the rejuvenation process is not instantaneous. It takes time, and it keeps on developing over and over again. It took, how much? About 150 days for us to get those rats. We have young rats and old rats. We have treated rats and untreated rats. And Kavita Singh, our principal investigator in Mumbai, showed us a wonderful picture of all of the young and old rats' hair. And in every single case, you could tell which was the young rat, which was the treated rat and which was a control rat. So it's quite amazing. Steve Horvath just saw our latest pictures, and he says that's earth-shattering. In a place where there are earthquakes, I'm not sure it's a great phrase. But yeah, so I really think we're looking at a transition in humanity. So we'll see. Anybody else? Oh, and you had a second part to that question? Well, the second part pretty much answered by the first part. We're trying to cure the diseases of aging. That's our first thing.
Okay, I'm open for questions. Anybody wants to make a question to Harold? I will bring the microphone. Go on.
Don't be afraid.
Yes.
I just wonder, what's your prediction for the next person who is going to reach immortality? But I'm not sure immortality is a kind of infinity number, but do you have a number in your brain? Just think about a number, 150,000 or...
You know, I'm not so sure. Oh. I'm not so sure that immortality is a great thing. I tell you the truth. I say let's try it out for a century or two, see how it works, and you know, then you can make a decision. Nobody's going to force you to take your injections. By the way, that's all it was with rats. A series of originally 4 injections. The injections started taking place about 4 days after the first injection, and maximum effect occurred about 2 weeks after the first injection, and then aging appeared to start again more rapidly than normally. In the second treatment, the aging did not reappear. And the levels stayed low, lower than the control. So that's just a fact, and it's published. At least it's published in bioarchive.
We have video and photo, so Nicholas is going to try and show anyone wants to see.
Okay.
Yeah, in some minutes.
Okay. So
Anybody? Yes.
Dr. Katcher, what is the timeline for further development for additional tests, human trials, and so on?
well, I'm not so sure of the timeline. We have we have it all planned. It depends on getting enough E5 to be able to do it. And unfortunately, conditions here in California have not been ideal for us with the COVID crisis. We can't get a decent technician. We have supplies that say they'll be in there in a week, and then a week later they say wait 2 weeks and they'll be here. But me and Jay, now, pardon me, Jay, stand up for a second. This is Jay Aurora. Jay Aurora is my principal lab technician who actually hates biology and is a financial whiz, but he's also a whiz in the lab, and he's really good. He's excellent pipetting technique and very hardworking. So between the two of us, we were able to do some. Yeah, you can sit there. We were able to do some really interesting stuff, and we made several inventions that we believe will lead to the ultimate product that we're desiring. So that, that's about it.
Anybody else?
Oh, Marilyn. Sam?
I'm very excited by your work. I think it will be world changing, and I've been following it closely. The one thing I'm wondering is, it seems like your approach is different from the partial reprogramming by the Yamnaka factors, and that for example David Sinclair was experimenting with. And
You're talking about the partial, the OSKM.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, exactly.
I think in essence it's not different.
Oh, okay. Because I was curious whether or not, if you brought it back to that age of granulation, whether or not you would re-experience the developmental pathways like the growth spurt or your additional set of teeth coming out. Things like that.
The funny thing is with our, that's what I actually expected. Akshay originally was disappointed that our rats remained rather large. Now, 90 days after their second treatment, they're no longer so large, and their size, the weight hasn't decreased incredibly, but there's been a redistribution of body tissue. Fat tissue is gone, muscle tissue is there. So, yeah, we were actually talking about doing experiments to find the density of these rats and find out the percentage of fat tissue.
Have you looked at bone marrow stem cells, bone marrow density?
Not yet. No, as I've said before, it seems to me that we've uncovered a couple of peaks of a vast continent, and those happen to be particularly important, valuable peaks. But I think there's a lot else that can be done and that will be done. I think this is the beginning of a new medicine, a real medicine, a medicine that doesn't hurt you but only helps you.
Are you hopeful for yourself?
I'm hopeful for myself. If it doesn't happen, that's okay. I wouldn't be the first soldier to give his life for something of value. And then, no, that's honestly how I feel about it.
No, it's going to happen for you. It's going to happen for you.
It's my daughter.
Exactly.
Oh, I just had a question. I'm always fascinated about your dream. So I'm always curious about the nuanced details. when you
Remember, this was 1985,
so in 1985,
but I've never forgotten.
when you had the dream, did people look the same they look today? Did they look different, like they evolved, or did technology around your environment look different? I'm just kind of curious if this 400 years in the future,
Oh, I see what you mean.
if people looked a little different, or just like
That's a good question. It seemed to me that the soldiers were shorter and darker than it's typical for San Francisco. Otherwise, I can't really say I looked that closely.
but not the tall people from Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Not the tall aliens from Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
No, they didn't. I do wonder about the origin of the dream and the coincidence of all of these UAPs being identified. I wonder if somehow the idea wasn't, to me, the purpose of extending life is not because life is so wonderful. And extending youth, yes, that's very clear to me now that I'm 77 years old. Extending life, maybe not. Now I forget.
When would extending life not be a good idea?
Imagine all of those people who strap the suicide explosive vests onto their chest. They have generally young people with whole lives ahead of them. They have decided to shorten their life purposely because when your life has no further meaning, and when there's no point to it,
Suicide.
basically, sadly, my father was much the same way. He was 98 years old. He couldn't hear. He lost his interest in watching television, lying in a bed all day, watching television, reading mystery books. And he used to ask me to gather up sleeping pills for him. Of course, I wouldn't do it. And whether that's moral or immoral, I can't even say. But
Understandable. People live a long, long time.
yeah,
There's different types of suffering you can undergo, not just physically, but also psychologically.
yeah.
Like basically, when you're asking somebody how long they're going to live, you're asking them what are the conditions under which they will
Well, exactly.
So,
And if
life
they're-
itself is actually a pretty amazing thing.
If their conditions are continual and worsening debility, who would want to live like that? There's a story about the goddess Aurora, who took on a young lover named Tithonius because he was so beautiful, and she prayed to her fellow gods to give him immortality, and he got immortality, but she neglected to ask for youth, immortal youth. So he just became uglier and older and uglier and older and uglier until she locked him away in some room deep
It's
in.
pretty hard to live forever though if you are unhealthy.
Yes.
So that's.
And what about
that's
what about poverty, for example? If our lives are a constant struggle, we may want to end that struggle. There's an old folk song that the refrain is, "All my trials, Lord, soon be over." And I think there are many people who feel the same way about it.
But there are many people amongst us who are doing such interesting work or have the potential to do
Oh, absolutely.
And if they got an extension, like for example, if Einstein had another 300 years.
Forget about Einstein, what about me? I have all kinds of plans I'd like to see put into effect.
Okay, I have a question for you, Harold. Part of your theory is only understanding of developmental biology. So based on that, besides reversing aging, what other applications are you most excited about looking into?
Well, I mean, reversing the diseases of aging. I'm excited about reversing fertility. I'm excited about the potential of perhaps increasing human brain power. I think there are a lot of things I'm just not thinking of that will come to us as we work. That's what we've seen in our own work. This theory of mine didn't come full blown from my head. It came from our research and our own work as well as the literature. Pardon me. And unfortunately, I have the kind of Semitic nose which is shaped in the wrong direction for maps, for masks rather. Should be upturned. Okay. Yes, ma'am. This is my daughter, Sasha, by the way.
Are there specific aging-related diseases that you believe these techniques will cure?
Yeah, good question, Sasha. Yeah, well, needless to say, we're going for the low-hanging fruit. For instance, diseases for which there are no cures, and which are very common. And the one certainly one of the ones that we've picked right away was frailty, because we have seen the grip strength of our rats increase tremendously with treatment. And they become as young, as fast, and as cognitively awake as young rats.
Do the rats express other symptoms of aging, like arteriosclerosis or Alzheimer's? Is there?
No, rats don't get Alzheimer's. Apparently, only humans get Alzheimer's. There's a related disease in monkeys, but we haven't seen. We're just. I hate to say this. We're just waiting for our control rats to start dying off. to show that our experimental rats have much greater longevity. Sir?
Your treated rats live.
Oh, Peter.
Yeah, your treated rats live longer than they would if they hadn't been treated.
We don't know yet. We're doing the third rejuvenation right now, but they're only 31 months old, so they've got a bit of time to go. So we'll see.
Find out.
Yeah. Funny thing is, I think I was telling this at some party or another. I used to teach the biology of aging. And I asked students what they thought about immortality, things of that nature. They hated the idea, most of them, about half of them. They said their ideal would be to live to a healthy old age and die in their sleep. And that's it. Okay, I'm not forcing anybody to take the treatment. I can understand.
Society programs us.
Exactly.
Most children do not want to die in their sleep.
No.
Most children don't even know it exists, or aging exists. So what we need is to start young and give them an open-ended horizon, and they won't think like that. There's terror management theory, mortality salience theory. Both of those are studies of human psychology and how they approach mortality. If you give older people an opportunity to think about open-ended lifespans and ask them what they would be doing, and there are studies that show that it's the wrong question. How long do you want to live? It's the wrong question. How long do you want to live if you were healthy? Is the right question.
Yeah.
And very, very few people actually ask that part, because everybody just wants to sit in the drama and the controversy of talking about living forever. And people want excuses not to hope as well.
And that's correct, because if you start hoping,
then you have to do something.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're sitting there, it's like Schrodinger's cat is no longer ignorant, therefore you actually have to make a choice of whether or not you want to take action towards this. It's a crazy, crazy thing. Aging, the whole way people think about aging.
Yes.
It basically is its own suppressant. And the only way you can allow us to do is exactly the work you're doing. And
Thank you.
show with science and evidence that we can do something about it.
And that's one of the things that bothers me. Right now, religion has the grasp on our, quote, immortal souls. And religion is an organization of human beings. Any particular religion, no matter how holy they are, we've already seen enough controversy with holy men, and yet science cannot extend the life of an individual by more than by a second, unless they're dying of some particular disease and can cure that disease. I'm hoping that someday people won't even know that humans age. But we'll see. Okay.
That person there.
Yes, sir.
How long did the estimated age effect last after treatment?
Oh, one of the problems of aging is that you lose your hearing.
How long did the epigenetic age results last after treatment?
That's one of the questions we were asking ourselves, of course. It appears after second dose that they either age at a lower than normal or at the normal rate. So if you were brought back to 20, you could have another entire adult lifespan, is my feeling, because the epigenetics are just there. The metabolism is there, the biochemistry is there, the physiology is there. So I think you could live several lifetimes. How many? We have no idea, but things look promising at this point. So we know at least 3. 3 to go.
The ethical considerations of this, I mean, don't you think that in a capitalist system that it's really just going to be rich people that are going to be living these lives?
Well, our intention is to prevent that.
What are the odds you think that it would be available to all people? Would it just be kind of some hierarchy of immortality?
There would be a hierarchy in what way?
No, if the costs were very high, like typically.
No, I understood that part. Yeah, our object
Like it's
is,
not going to be available to everyone. It's going to be available to the people with money.
No, we are absolutely working on making it available to everyone. And we have a way of doing it, and that's intellectual property that I can't discuss. But Jay?
The answer is going to be cheaper than the dental costs in America.
Yeah, that would be good.
Yeah, well, I'll believe you when insulin prices go down. How about that? we can't even make insulin affordable, so.
You should.
Yeah.
Well, exactly.
You know, I can't base my life on the potentials for well, in some cases, the potential for catastrophe is so great that you can't do it. But here, the potential is unknown. And in fact, in the industrialized world, populations are going down and down, such that the labor force will be insufficient for, imagine if you could revitalize all of those old people. They jump out of bed and all of a sudden they're skilled at whatever they do, because they have not only the experience, but they have the strength back, the mental acuity back, and they'll just be, and much more knowledge than they ever had. So it'll just be better. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
I know that we've had this discussion many times with the family about the ethics of it, who's going to be having it and who's not.
Yeah.
And I know you've discussed that. In your hands, you have honestly always wanted this to be available for everyone.
Yes.
It has been a moral thing that a staple of your beliefs that you want everyone to be healthy
Maybe not everyone, but most people, yeah.
Well, I know it's something that you greatly desire. Now, thought that, as long as it's in your hands, God knows, we don't know what the future holds and where the technology is going to go, but we do know, at least you've told me and you talked to me that it's morally very important for you that this is available for everyone.
Correct. Correct. My daughter, Sasha, who is perhaps the biggest capitalist I know, who calls herself an AI communist, what is it? Communist.
I just, we have a potential future for the AI communist revolution. We're going to get into this in 5 years.
Yeah, okay. I'm sorry.
Last one.
Yes.
Oh, no, one more question.
Oh. One more question, no questions?